Ethan Miller had not planned to return to the lake house, not after 20 years of carefully building a life that stayed far away from memory, but life had a way of pulling people back to the places they once ran from, and on a quiet autumn afternoon he found himself driving through the narrow roads of northern Michigan, the trees painted in soft red and gold, his hands tied on the steering wheel as familiar landmarks appeared one by one, each mile stirring feelings he had buried deep. Because this house was not just a place, it was a chapter he never allowed himself to reread, a chapter that began with his older brother Daniel, ended with loss, and left behind emotions Ethan never learned how to name out loud. The lake house stood exactly where it always had, quiet and still, resting near the water like it was waiting, its white paint worn, the porch rail slightly crooked, and when Ethan parked the car and stepped out, the air felt heavier than it should, thick with memory. As if the past had been holding its breath all these years just to see if he would come back, and he wondered if this visit was a mistake, because coming back meant facing feelings he had avoided for 2 decades, feelings tied not only to grief but to Claire, Daniel's wife, the woman who had been kind to him from the very beginning, who had laughed at his bad jokes, who had always listened, and who, without meaning to, had slowly become the one person he thought about when he should not have. Which was why he left after Daniel's funeral, believing distance was the only way to protect everyone involved. Ethan paused on the porch, noticing how the wood creaked under his weight just like before, and when he pulled the old key from his pocket, he hesitated, because this door had once opened into warmth, family dinners, summer laughter, and now it felt like a line between who he was and who he used to be, but he unlocked it anyway, stepping inside to find dust floating in the sunlight. Furniture covered with sheets, and the quiet hum of a house that had not been lived in for too long, and for a moment he thought he was alone, until he heard a soft sound from the kitchen, the gentle clink of a cup against a counter, and then a voice he recognized instantly, calm but touched with surprise, saying his name like it had always belonged to her, Ethan, and he turned to see Claire standing there, older but still familiar, her hair shorter now, a little gray at the edges, her eyes carrying the weight of years lived without the man they both loved, and the moment stretched between them, filled with everything they had never said, because neither of them expected this meeting, yet neither seemed shocked, as if somewhere deep down they always knew their paths would cross again. Claire gave a small smile that felt careful, like she was testing whether it was allowed, and Ethan felt a rush of emotions he had no plan for, surprise mixed with relief, guilt mixed with something warm and unsettling, and as they stood facing each other in that quiet house, he noticed how time had changed her in gentle ways, giving her strength instead of taking her softness, and he realized with a sharp clarity that his feelings had never truly left, they had only learned how to stay silent, and as Claire spoke again, welcoming him inside as if no time had passed, Ethan understood that this return was not just about selling a house or settling old matters, it was the beginning of something he had spent 20 years trying to avoid, because being here meant facing the truth of what his heart had carried all along, and even though neither of them knew it yet, this quiet reunion at the lake house was the first step toward a conversation that would change both of their lives forever. The afternoon moved quickly after the surprise faded, and Ethan and Claire found themselves sitting at the small wooden table near the window, the same place where countless meals had once been shared, but now the space felt different, quieter, filled with careful pauses instead of easy laughter, and yet there was a strange comfort in it, as if time had not erased their connection but only tested it. Claire poured tea with steady hands while Ethan spoke about his long years away, his work, the cities he had lived in, the routines that kept him busy but never truly fulfilled, and she listened the way she always had, with patience and focus, asking thoughtful questions without pressing too hard, while she shared pieces of her own life, how she stayed near the lake after Daniel's death because it felt like the only place where his memory made sense, how she raised their son mostly on her own until he left for college, how nights often felt longer than they should, and how learning to live alone was not the same as choosing it. The conversation moved fast but deep, touching on missed chances, silent struggles, and the strange way grief reshapes people, and as they talked, Ethan noticed small details that made his chest tighten, like how Claire paused before saying Daniel's name, or how her eyes drifted to the lake when memories grew heavy, and he realized she had carried far more than she ever showed, which made his years of running feel selfish and small. At one point she asked why he never visited, her tone calm but honest, and Ethan answered without hiding this time, saying he believed staying away was the only way to respect his brother's memory and protect everyone from confusion. And Claire listened quietly before telling him that silence can hurt just as much as the wrong words, because absence leaves room for questions that never find answers, and that simple truth hit him harder than any accusation. The day slipped toward evening, sunlight fading into soft gray, and the mood shifted when Claire stood by the window and spoke about the house, how it had been waiting, how some places hold on to emotions even when people leave, and she admitted she had kept it untouched because part of her was afraid of letting go, and another part hoped someone would return, not knowing who, but believing that unfinished stories deserve a chance to be heard. Ethan felt the weight of that thought settle between them, and when Claire finally turned to face him, her expression serious yet gentle, she said there was something she had carried for a long time, something she never felt ready to share until now, and the air in the room changed instantly, because this was no longer a conversation about the past but a doorway into something deeper, something uncertain. And as she took a slow breath and asked him to listen without judgment, Ethan understood that whatever she was about to say would change the meaning of every quiet moment they had just shared, and he nodded, unaware that the truth she was about to reveal had been waiting 20 years for this exact moment to be spoken aloud. Claire did not sit down when she began to speak, as if staying on her feet gave her strength, and she told Ethan that after Daniel passed away there were many nights when sleep refused to come, nights when the house felt too large and the silence pressed too close, and during one of those nights she went through old boxes searching for nothing in particular, only trying to feel less alone, and that was when she found something unexpected tucked inside a book Daniel used to keep near his desk, a letter written in his careful handwriting, dated shortly before his illness became serious, and she explained that the letter was not dramatic or sad but thoughtful and calm, like Daniel himself, and in it he spoke about family, about trust, and about how grateful he was to have a brother like Ethan, someone he admired not just for his strength but for his kindness. And as Claire described the letter, her voice stayed steady but her eyes filled with emotion, because Daniel had written that if anything ever happened to him he hoped Ethan would not disappear from their lives, that he trusted Ethan to protect what mattered, to stay close, and to live honestly instead of carrying guilt for things never done. And hearing this made Ethan feel like the ground shifted beneath him, because the years he spent away were built on the belief that distance was the only respectful choice, yet here was proof that his brother had wanted the opposite. Claire then told him she had kept that letter hidden, not because she meant to deceive but because she did not know how to share something so heavy without opening doors she was not ready to face, and she admitted that over time grief changed into quiet companionship with memory, but loneliness stayed, and she reached a point where living only for what had been felt like slowly fading, and it was then that she made a decision for herself, one that took years of thought and honesty, and she explained that she had come to see love not as something that replaces but something that grows, that honoring Daniel did not mean denying her own future or pretending she had no heart left to offer. Ethan listened without interruption, his thoughts racing as moments from the past suddenly made sense, the kindness, the unspoken tension, the feelings he buried. And when Claire reached into her bag and took out a neatly folded document, his breath caught, because this was not a moment driven by impulse but by care and time, and she told him the document was simple, not romantic in the usual sense, but meaningful to her, because it represented choice, clarity, and respect. And she explained that she was considering selling the lake house and starting a new chapter, but she did not want to do it alone if there was a chance they could walk forward together, slowly, openly, without secrets, and she was not asking him to promise love or commitment, only to consider the possibility of a shared future built on truth rather than fear. The room felt small as the weight of her words settled, and Ethan struggled to find the right response, because every instinct told him this was complicated, layered with history and emotion, yet another part of him recognized the honesty in her voice and the courage it took to speak after so many years, and he realized this was not a forbidden moment or a betrayal, but an invitation to stop running and start listening to what life had been quietly offering. And as Claire finished speaking she made it clear she would accept any answer, that her proposal was not meant to pressure but to free them both from silence, and she stepped back, giving him space, leaving Ethan standing between the past he thought he understood and a future he never allowed himself to imagine. Knowing that whatever he chose, nothing between them would ever be the same again, Ethan asked for a moment before answering. And instead of staying inside where the walls seemed full of memories, they stepped outside together and walked toward the lake, the evening air cool and calm, the water smooth like glass, and the steady rhythm of their footsteps gave Ethan time to breathe and think, because Claire's words were not reckless or emotional but careful and honest, and that made them harder to ignore. As they stood near the water, Ethan finally spoke about the years he spent carrying guilt, how he believed wanting anything after Daniel's death meant disrespect, how he chose distance because it felt safer than truth, and how that choice slowly turned into regret. While Claire listened without interrupting, her presence steady, and when he finished she told him that grief teaches people different lessons, that for her it taught patience and strength, but also the importance of choosing life instead of only remembering it, and she said she loved Daniel deeply and always would, but love does not end when one chapter closes, it changes shape, and pretending otherwise only leads to emptiness. The moon rose slowly above the lake, its reflection stretching across the water, and in that quiet moment Ethan felt something settle inside him, not certainty but peace, and he told Claire he could not promise perfection or easy answers, but he could promise honesty, presence, and the courage to try, and that was enough for her, because she was never asking for more than truth. They spoke about moving forward carefully, about respecting the past while allowing space for something new, about rebuilding trust with themselves before anything else, and when they returned to the house there was no rush, no dramatic gesture, only a shared understanding that they were no longer hiding from what they felt. Later that night, as Ethan prepared to leave, Claire handed him the key to the lake house, not as a symbol of ownership but as an invitation, and she told him that whatever happened next would be a choice made together, step by step, and as Ethan drove away under the quiet sky, he realized that coming back had not reopened old wounds as he feared, but had allowed them to heal in a way time alone never could, and for the first time in 20 years, the future did not feel like something to avoid, but something worth slowly walking toward, guided not by fear or guilt, but by understanding, respect, and a love that had waited patiently for the right moment to begin again.